The leather menu trembled in Destiny Brooks' hands as she approached table 12. A distinguished 60-year-old billionaire with silver hair looked her up and down with casual dismissiveness. "She can't even read the menu," Philippe Dubois announced loudly, his Parisian accent dripping with disdain. The entire restaurant fell silent. Every eye turned toward the 28-year-old black waitress in her crisp white uniform. But Philippe had no idea what he had just unleashed. This woman he was humiliating possessed a secret that would soon turn his arrogant world completely upside down. What happened next would become the most talked about moment in Boston dining history, and prove that sometimes the person you underestimate most is exactly the one who will teach you the most devastating lesson of your life. Destiny Brooks approached table 12 with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to move through spaces where she wasn't entirely welcome. The leather menu folder felt substantial in her hands, its weight a reminder of the exclusive world she served but could never truly inhabit. Le Jardin's dining room hummed with the quiet conversations of Boston's elite, their voices blending with the soft classical music that drifted from hidden speakers. Crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of light across white tablecloths, while the scent of expensive wine and saffron-infused sauces filled the air. At table 12, Philippe Dubois sat like a king holding court, his silver hair immaculately styled, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection. Everything about him screamed old European money and the confidence that came with never having to question one's place in the world. "Good evening, gentlemen, madam," Destiny said, her voice carrying the polished professionalism she had perfected over 18 months of serving people who rarely bothered to learn her name. "I'm Destiny, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. May I start you with something to drink while you review our menu?" She distributed the leather folders with efficient movements, careful not to let her fingers linger too long or make unnecessary contact. The art of invisible service required constant vigilance, present enough to anticipate needs, absent enough to avoid notice. Philippe's dinner companions, 2 distinguished businessmen, and a woman whose pearls probably cost more than Destiny's annual salary, murmured polite acknowledgments. But Philippe himself simply stared at her with the sort of assessment usually reserved for livestock at auction. "Tell me, dear," Philippe began, his authentic Parisian accent lending authority to every syllable. "Are you quite certain you're qualified to guide us through this menu? It's entirely in French, you understand, and I wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed by the complexity." His tone carried the particular cruelty of someone who had learned to wound without appearing overtly hostile. Around the dining room, other conversations continued, but Destiny noticed the subtle shift in attention. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a distinguished woman with silver hair, who dined alone at table 15 every Thursday, had paused in cutting her salmon. The young couple at table 8 exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even Marcus, the restaurant manager, seemed to sense the tension from his position near the kitchen doors, though he made no move to intervene. The words struck Destiny like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure through sheer force of will. She thought of her mother, Celeste, lying in Massachusetts General Hospital just 20 minutes away, her body ravaged by chemotherapy treatments they could barely afford. The medical bills arrived with crushing regularity, each one a reminder of how precarious their lives had become since her mother's diagnosis. Tonight's tips would go toward next week's rent, just as last night's tips had covered groceries and the bus fare to the hospital. After her shift ended at 10, she would change out of this uniform and drive to the financial district, where she would spend the next 6 hours cleaning corporate offices until dawn. Her knees would ache from scrubbing floors. Her back would scream from emptying trash cans. But the extra $300 a week meant the difference between keeping their apartment and losing everything. "I appreciate your concern, sir," Destiny replied, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest. "I've been working with this menu for quite some time now, and I'm confident I can help you navigate any questions you might have." But Philippe wasn't finished with his performance. He picked up the menu with theatrical deliberation, scanning the French text with the exaggerated focus of someone making a point. His companions watched with the uncomfortable fascination of people witnessing a public execution they couldn't stop, but couldn't look away from. The woman in pearls fidgeted with her wine glass, clearly sensing the cruelty, but lacking the courage to intervene. The businessmen simply waited, their faces carefully neutral, as if this sort of humiliation was simply part of the evening's entertainment. "Ah, but you see, this is precisely what I mean about American establishments," Philippe announced, his voice carrying across the dining room with practiced projection. "They simply don't understand the importance of proper cultural education. How can one adequately present dishes one cannot pronounce? Take this, for example." He pointed to a line on the menu with manicured precision. "Cassoulet toulousain. Do you even know what region this dish originates from? Or shall we pretend that your American education system has somehow prepared you for the nuances of French culinary tradition?" The insult hung in the air like poison gas, designed to wound not just Destiny, but every American within earshot. Several diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the calculated cruelty, even if they lacked the spine to challenge it directly. But as Philippe's words settled over the dining room like a suffocating blanket, something extraordinary began to happen inside Destiny's chest. Her fingers found the small, worn French dictionary hidden in her apron pocket, a treasure more precious than any jewel in this glittering room. The book had belonged to Grandmère Amélie, her grandmother, who had fled Nazi-occupied France in 1943 with nothing but courage and an unshakable belief in the power of language. Amélie had arrived in Boston speaking no English, working in textile factories during the day and studying by candlelight at night. She had died when Destiny was 15, but not before spending countless afternoons teaching her granddaughter that words could be weapons, shields, and bridges all at once. "Ma chérie," Amélie would whisper in her musical accent, "when they try to make you invisible, speak so beautifully, they cannot look away." The memory of her grandmother's voice, speaking those exact words in perfect Parisian French, sent electricity through Destiny's veins. She remembered the library sessions that had followed Amélie's death, the way she had devoured Baudelaire and Proust, like a woman starving for beauty in a world determined to deny it to her. She thought of the nights spent perfecting pronunciation while her mother slept, the hours memorizing poetry that painted pictures of love and loss in colors she had never seen. She thought of the French newspaper she kept hidden under the bar counter, Le Figaro, which she read religiously to maintain the language that connected her to her grandmother's legacy. All of this Philippe assumed she could never possess, would never deserve, could never achieve. His certainty was breathtaking in its arrogance, and it was about to become his spectacular downfall. "I understand your concern about authenticity, sir," Destiny said, her voice carrying a new note that made Mrs. Patterson look up sharply from her dinner. "The cassoulet toulousain you mentioned is indeed a traditional dish from the Languedoc region, specifically from Toulouse, which is why it bears that name. It's a slow-cooked casserole featuring white beans, duck confit, and Toulouse sausage, though some variations include lamb or goose depending on seasonal availability." She paused, allowing the information to settle over the table like snowfall. Philippe's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his confident facade. "Perhaps you'd prefer to hear about our wine pairings. I noticed from your accent that you might appreciate something from your native Bordeaux region. We have an excellent Châteauneuf du Pape that would complement the cassoulet beautifully. Though if you prefer something more familiar, our sommelier has selected a lovely Margaux that showcases the terroir you know so well." The silence that followed was electric with possibility. Every eye in the restaurant had turned toward their table, sensing that something momentous was happening, but not yet understanding what they were witnessing. Philippe's mouth had fallen slightly open, his silver eyebrows drawn together in confusion, and the first stirrings of something that might have been fear. His companions looked between him and Destiny with growing bewilderment, as if the natural order of their universe had suddenly shifted on its axis. At table 15, Mrs. Patterson had set down her fork entirely and was leaning forward with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to recognize exactly what was unfolding. Even Marcus had stepped closer, his manager's instincts telling him that whatever was happening at table 12 was about to change everything. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had witnessed enough cruelty in her 72 years to recognize it instantly, and what she was observing at table 12 made her stomach turn with familiar disgust. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision, her sharp eyes never leaving the unfolding drama that had captured the attention of half the dining room. As a retired professor of comparative literature from Harvard, Eleanor had spent 4 decades studying the ways people used language as both weapon and shield. She recognized Philippe Dubois immediately, not personally, but as a type she had encountered countless times in academic circles. The sort of man who confused birthright with intelligence, geography with sophistication, and volume with authority. What intrigued her far more was the young woman standing beside his table, whose composure under fire suggested depths that everyone else in the room was missing entirely. Eleanor had been dining at Le Jardin every Thursday evening for 3 years, ever since her husband Robert's death had left her with too much money and too little company. She preferred table 15 precisely because it afforded her an unobstructed view of the restaurant's social theater, where Boston's elite performed their elaborate rituals of status and dominance. Tonight's performance, however, was different. The young waitress Destiny, she had introduced herself, moved with grace that spoke of careful training, but Eleanor detected something else beneath the professional veneer. The way Destiny's fingers had unconsciously traced the edge of something in her apron pocket when Philippe mentioned French cuisine, the slight shift in her posture when he questioned her qualifications. Most tellingly, the barely perceptible tightening around her eyes when he insulted American education. These were not the reactions of someone unfamiliar with the subject matter. "Excuse me, miss," Philippe was saying now, his voice dripping with theatrical concern. "I do hope you won't take offense, but perhaps it would be more appropriate if you could locate someone with more extensive experience to assist us this evening. This is, after all, a rather important business dinner, and we simply cannot afford any unfortunate misunderstandings about our meal." His companions nodded along with the sort of automatic agreement that money often inspired, though Eleanor noticed the woman in pearls had begun fidgeting with her napkin. The businessmen maintained their carefully neutral expressions, clearly calculating whether intervening would benefit or harm their prospects. It was a masterclass in cowardice disguised as diplomacy, the sort of willful blindness that allowed cruelty to flourish in polite society. Destiny's response was measured and professional, but Eleanor caught the subtle change in her breathing, the way her free hand had curled slightly at her side. "I assure you, sir, that I'm fully qualified to help you have an exceptional dining experience this evening. Would you prefer to start with our wine selection while you consider the menu?" But Philippe was clearly enjoying his performance too much to let it end so easily. He made a show of consulting his gold watch, then looked around the dining room with exaggerated concern, as if searching for adult supervision. Several other diners had begun to notice the disturbance, their conversations quieting as they strained to eavesdrop on the increasingly uncomfortable exchange. "You see, this is exactly what I mean," Philippe announced, his voice projecting across the restaurant with practiced ease. "American service industry workers simply lack the cultural foundation necessary for proper French dining. How can one adequately describe dishes whose pronunciation one cannot master? Take something as simple as bouillabaisse marseillaise. Do you even know what makes it authentic to that particular region? Or shall we simply hope for the best and pretend that enthusiasm can substitute for knowledge. The cruelty was surgical in its precision, designed to humiliate without crossing lines that might invite official complaint. Eleanor recognized the technique from countless faculty meetings, where similar power games had played out with academic careers hanging in the balance. But as Philippe's words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, Eleanor noticed something remarkable happening to the young waitress. The small French dictionaries that had been hidden in Destiny's apron pocket was now visible, its worn leather cover catching the restaurant's golden light. More importantly, Eleanor spotted the edge of what appeared to be a French newspaper tucked beneath the bar counter, where Destiny had been standing earlier. Le Figaro, unless she was mistaken, hardly the reading material of someone unfamiliar with French culture. Eleanor's pulse quickened with recognition and anticipation. She had spent her career teaching students to see beyond surface assumptions, to recognize intelligence wherever it chose to reveal itself. What she was witnessing was not ignorance being exposed, but preparation meeting opportunity. The moment crystallized when Philippe made his fatal error. "Perhaps you learned your French from one of those online translation programs," he said with a laugh that invited his companions to join his amusement. "Or maybe you picked up a few phrases from movies? I suppose that passes for cultural education in America these days." The insult was designed to wound not just Destiny, but every American within earshot, and Eleanor watched as several diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The young couple at table 8 looked mortified. Even Marcus, the restaurant manager, had stepped closer to their section, clearly sensing that intervention might soon become necessary. Eleanor rose from her chair with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. Her silver hair caught the light as she approached table 12, her steps measured and deliberate. She had made her decision, though she suspected it was merely serving as catalyst for something that would have happened regardless. The young woman standing beside Philippe's table possessed something far more dangerous than ignorance. She had knowledge, and she was finally ready to use it. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority of decades spent lecturing to rooms full of Harvard's finest. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about French cuisine. As someone who has spent considerable time studying French culture, I wonder if I might join your discussion." Philippe's eyebrows rose with pleased surprise, clearly assuming he had found an ally in his performance. "Madame, how delightful. Yes, please. We were just discussing the challenges of proper cultural appreciation in American dining establishments. I'm Philippe Dubois, and I was trying to explain to this young lady the complexities involved in authentic French gastronomy." He gestured toward Destiny with the casual dismissiveness of someone swatting a fly. "Perhaps you could help her understand the nuances she seems to be missing." But Eleanor's attention had shifted entirely to Destiny, whose dark eyes now held a light that seemed to illuminate the entire corner of the restaurant. Something was building there, something that would soon transform this evening from simple humiliation into something far more memorable. "Actually," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a note of academic curiosity that made Philippe lean forward expectantly, "I was rather hoping to hear what this young lady has to say about French culture. In my experience, the most profound insights often come from unexpected sources." She smiled directly at Destiny, whose grip on the menu folder had tightened perceptibly. "Tell me, dear, what do you know about the regional variations in traditional French cooking? I find it's often an excellent way to gauge someone's true understanding of the culture." The question hung in the air like a challenge, but Eleanor could see that Destiny understood exactly what was being offered. Not rescue, but opportunity. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Philippe's confident smile faltered slightly as he realized the conversation had taken an unexpected turn. His companions exchanged uncertain glances, sensing a shift in power they couldn't quite identify. Around the dining room, other patrons had begun to take notice of the gathering at table 12, their own conversations quieting as they strained to hear what would happen next. Even the kitchen staff had begun to peer through the service window, drawn by some instinct that told them they were about to witness something remarkable. At the center of it all stood Destiny Brooks, no longer the invisible service worker, but something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The silence that followed Mrs. Patterson's question stretched across the dining room like a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken tension that seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibility. Destiny felt every eye in the restaurant focusing on her, the weight of their collective attention pressing down like a physical force. Her grandmother's worn dictionary seemed to pulse with warmth against her hip, while the memory of Amélie's voice whispered encouragement in perfect Parisian French. This was the moment she had been unconsciously preparing for through countless nights of study, though she had never imagined it would arrive in quite this spectacular fashion. Philippe sat frozen at his table, his silver eyebrows drawn together in confusion as he tried to process how his evening of casual cruelty had suddenly shifted into something he couldn't control. His companions looked between him and the two women with growing bewilderment, sensing that the natural order of their universe was about to be fundamentally altered. Mrs. Patterson stood beside table 12 with the serene confidence of someone who had spent decades recognizing brilliance wherever it chose to hide, her sharp eyes never leaving Destiny's face. She had posed her question about regional French cooking variations with the precision of a master chess player making an opening gambit, knowing exactly what response she hoped to provoke. The academic in her recognized the signs, the way Destiny's posture had subtly straightened, the barely perceptible shift in her breathing that suggested someone gathering courage for a momentous leap. Eleanor had spent 40 years teaching literature to Harvard's brightest students, and she knew intelligence when she saw it, regardless of the packaging society chose to ignore. What she was witnessing was not incompetence being exposed, but genius finally being given permission to speak. "Well," Philippe interjected, his voice carrying a note of impatience tinged with the first hint of genuine uncertainty. "Surely this isn't such a difficult question for someone who claims to understand our menu." He looked around the table at his companions, seeking the automatic support he had grown accustomed to receiving, but found only uncomfortable shifting and avoided eye contact. The woman in pearls had begun folding and refolding her napkin with nervous precision, while the businessmen studied their wine glasses as if they contained the secrets of the universe. The entire dynamic of the evening had shifted in ways that Philippe couldn't quite grasp, though some primitive instinct was beginning to whisper warnings that he chose to ignore. He had spent 60 years believing that birth and wealth automatically conferred superiority, and the possibility that he might be wrong was simply too threatening to contemplate. Destiny drew a breath that seemed to pull strength from every corner of the restaurant, her dark eyes meeting Mrs. Patterson's encouraging gaze before turning to face Philippe directly. "Regional variations in French cooking are actually quite fascinating," she began, her voice carrying a new note of quiet authority that made several nearby diners stop their conversations entirely. "Take the bouillabaisse Marseillaise you mentioned earlier. What makes it authentic to Marseille isn't just the specific fish rascasse, John Dory, sea robin, but the traditional cooking method that dates back to ancient Greek settlements. The fish must be cooked rapidly in a rolling boil, and the broth is served separately from the fish, accompanied by rouille and toasted bread rubbed with garlic." She paused, allowing the information to settle over the table like morning mist, her confidence growing with each precisely pronounced syllable. Philippe's mouth had fallen slightly open, his silver eyebrows climbing toward his hairline as Destiny continued with increasing fluency. "Of course, this differs significantly from other regional fish stews. Normandy's Marmite Diepoise uses cream and butter rather than olive oil and saffron, reflecting the dairy-rich traditions of northern France. And Brittany's Cotriade incorporates potatoes and uses whatever fish the boats bring in that day, making it more rustic but no less authentic to its region. The words flowed from her lips with the ease of someone who had spent years absorbing not just vocabulary, but culture, turning Philippe's weapon of choice, French culinary knowledge, against him with devastating precision. Around the dining room, other patrons had begun to lean forward in their seats, drawn by the unexpected turn their evening's entertainment had taken. Mrs. Patterson's eyes sparkled with barely contained delight as she watched Destiny gain momentum, recognizing the moment when a gifted student finally stopped hiding their light under a bushel. "Marvelous!" Eleanor exclaimed, her voice carrying across the restaurant with the enthusiasm of a teacher witnessing a breakthrough. "And what about the literary connections? French cuisine and literature have always been intimately connected, haven't they?" The question was another carefully lobbed opportunity, designed to give Destiny an opening to demonstrate the full scope of her knowledge. Philippe's companions had stopped even pretending to maintain their conversations, their attention riveted on the unfolding drama that was rapidly becoming the most compelling theater any of them had witnessed in years. "Absolutely," Destiny replied, her confidence now flowing like wine from an uncorked bottle. Brillat-Savarin wrote extensively about the philosophy of taste, but it was Marcel Proust who truly captured how food connects to memory and identity. His famous Madeleine passage in À la recherche du temps perdu demonstrates how a simple cake dipped in tea can unlock entire worlds of recollection. She turned slightly toward Philippe, whose face had gone pale beneath his distinguished tan. The narrator describes how the taste and scent transport him instantly to his childhood in Cambrai, proving that true appreciation of French culture requires understanding not just what we eat, but why it matters to our souls. C'est la différence entre manger et vraiment goûter, the difference between eating and truly tasting. The French phrase fell from Destiny's lips with such perfect Parisian pronunciation that several diners actually gasped audibly. Philippe's wineglass trembled in his hand as the reality of his situation began to penetrate his shock. This was not the ignorant American waitress he had expected to humiliate. This was someone who understood French culture with a depth that put his own superficial knowledge to shame. Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands together with undisguised joy, while the kitchen staff had abandoned all pretense of working to crowd around the service window. Even Marcus, the restaurant manager, had moved closer to their table, his professional instincts telling him that whatever was happening would become restaurant legend by morning. "Extraordinary," Mrs. Patterson declared, her voice ringing with academic authority. "Tell me, my dear, have you studied Verlaine? I'm particularly fond of his poem about resilience in the face of adversity." The question was the final key that would unlock everything Philippe thought he knew about the evening. Destiny's eyes lit up with recognition and something deeper, a connection to words that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her life. She had recited Verlaine's verses by her mother's hospital bed, drawing strength from poetry that spoke to the unbreakable human spirit. "Il faut être toujours ivre," Destiny began, her voice carrying the music of the French language like a perfectly tuned instrument. "Mais de quoi? De vin? De poésie? Ou de vertu? À votre guise." She paused, then translated with fluid grace. "One must always be drunk. But on what? On wine, on poetry, or on virtue? As you choose." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft clink of a fork hitting a plate somewhere in the dining room. Philippe sat frozen in his chair, his mouth agape, finally understanding that he had walked into a trap of his own making. The invisible waitress he had dismissed so casually possessed knowledge that transcended his own, wielding French culture like a master swordsman who had just revealed the true extent of their skill. The Verlaine quote hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, its perfect pronunciation reverberating through Le Jardin's dining room with the force of a revelation. Philippe Dubois sat paralyzed in his leather chair, his distinguished facade cracking like aged porcelain under pressure he had never anticipated. The wine mogul who had built his reputation on cultural superiority found himself face to face with someone whose knowledge ran deeper than his own shallow understanding of the country he called home. Around the restaurant, conversations had ceased entirely, replaced by the electric silence of an audience witnessing something extraordinary unfold before their eyes. Destiny stood at the center of it all, no longer the invisible service worker, but a woman transformed, her grandmother's spirit flowing through her voice as she prepared to deliver the intellectual coup de grace that would topple Philippe's arrogance once and for all. Mrs. Patterson stepped back slightly, recognizing that her role as catalyst was complete, and the real performance was about to begin. She had spent decades watching brilliant students find their voices, but rarely had she witnessed such a dramatic metamorphosis from suppression to expression. Destiny's transformation was breathtaking in its completeness. Her posture had straightened, her voice had gained resonance, and her eyes blazed with the confidence of someone who finally understood their own power. The French dictionary in her apron pocket seemed to pulse with ancestral energy, connecting her to generations of women who had used language as both shield and sword. Philippe's companions sat frozen at their table, their comfortable assumptions about social hierarchy crumbling before their eyes as they watched their host's supremacy evaporate in real time. Perhaps, Destiny continued, her voice carrying the musical cadence of someone who truly understood the language she was speaking, we should discuss the philosophical foundations of French cuisine more thoroughly. Brillat-Savarin wrote that La découverte d'un mets nouveau fait plus pour le bonheur du genre humain que la découverte d'une étoile nouvelle. The discovery of a new dish does more for the happiness of mankind than the discovery of a new star. She paused, allowing the quote to settle over Philippe like a shroud. But true appreciation requires understanding the cultural context, not merely the ability to purchase expensive ingredients. Tell me, Monsieur Dubois, what do you think Brillat-Savarin meant when he connected gastronomy to the pursuit of human happiness? Philippe's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his usual confidence replaced by the dawning horror of someone who realized they had wandered into intellectual territory far beyond their comprehension. He had spent his life using his French heritage as a bludgeon to establish superiority over others, never bothering to develop the deep cultural understanding that would make such claims legitimate. His knowledge extended to wine varietals and profit margins, but the philosophical and literary foundations that gave French culture its soul remained as foreign to him as Sanskrit. The woman standing before him possessed something he had never bothered to cultivate: genuine appreciation for the ideas and traditions that made France more than just a place to buy chateaux and collect accolades. Well, naturally, Philippe stammered, his silver hair appearing less distinguished and more disheveled as perspiration began to bead on his forehead. One must consider the obvious connections between. His voice trailed off as he realized he had nothing meaningful to contribute to a conversation about the deeper meanings of his own culture. The businessmen at his table exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the woman in pearls had begun studying her manicured nails with intense fascination. Around the dining room, other patrons leaned forward in their seats, sensing that they were witnessing not just a conversation, but a complete reversal of power dynamics that would become legendary among Boston's social elite. Destiny recognized Philippe's floundering for what it was: the desperate thrashing of someone whose intellectual poverty had finally been exposed. She felt no satisfaction in his humiliation, only a profound sadness that someone blessed with such advantages had chosen to use them as weapons rather than bridges. Her grandmother's voice whispered encouragement as she prepared to demonstrate the true depth of knowledge that years of dedicated study could produce. "Allow me to elaborate," she said with gentle precision that was somehow more devastating than any direct attack could have been. Brillat Savarin understood that food represents the intersection of necessity and artistry, survival and transcendence. When he wrote, Dis-moi ce que tu manges, je te dirai ce que tu es. Tell me what you eat, and I will tell you what you are. He was exploring how our relationship with nourishment reveals our deepest values and aspirations. The philosophical exposition continued with relentless grace as Destiny wove connections between French cuisine and literature that revealed years of passionate study. She quoted Proust's Meditations on Memory and Taste, referenced Baudelaire's poems about sensual pleasure and spiritual longing, and connected them all to the regional cooking traditions that Philippe had name-dropped without understanding. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his pretensions, delivered with such eloquence that even his humiliation became a form of education. Mrs. Patterson watched with undisguised admiration as Destiny transformed the restaurant into a lecture hall, teaching everyone present about the true meaning of cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation. But perhaps most importantly, Destiny continued, her voice gaining strength as she approached her crescendo, French culture teaches us that knowledge without wisdom is mere performance, and wisdom without compassion is mere cruelty. When Voltaire wrote about the importance of cultivating our gardens, he understood that true cultivation requires both patience and humility, qualities that cannot be purchased with money or inherited through birth. She turned to face Philippe directly, her dark eyes reflecting depths of understanding that his silver spoon upbringing had never encouraged him to develop. Money can indeed buy chateaux, Monsieur Dubois, but can it buy the appreciation necessary to truly understand what those chateaux represent? Can wealth purchase the wisdom to recognize knowledge wherever it chooses to reside? The question hung in the air like a perfectly balanced sword, its edge sharp enough to cut through decades of unexamined privilege. Philippe's face had gone from pale to ashen, his hands trembling as the full magnitude of his intellectual nakedness became clear to everyone present. He had spent 60 years believing that geography and genetics had made him superior to others, never realizing that superiority could only be earned through dedication and genuine understanding. The invisible waitress he had dismissed so casually possessed more authentic connection to French culture than he had ever bothered to develop. His wine empire suddenly seemed like exactly what it was, a business venture dressed up in cultural pretensions, profitable, but ultimately hollow. Around the dining room, the silence had taken on an almost sacred quality as diners absorbed the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Several people had their phones discreetly positioned to capture the moment, recognizing that they were present for something that would be discussed in Boston social circles for years to come. The kitchen staff had abandoned all pretense of working, clustering around the service window like theater audiences, watching the climax of a masterful drama. Even Marcus, the restaurant manager, stood transfixed, his professional concern about the disturbance overridden by recognition that he was witnessing something extraordinary. Mrs. Patterson felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Destiny reclaim her dignity with such magnificent grace. This was what education was supposed to accomplish, not the accumulation of credentials or the performance of superiority, but the transformation of individuals into their fullest potential. Destiny had taken every insult, every condescending remark, every assumption about her limitations, and alchemized them into pure intellectual gold. She had proven that knowledge belonged to anyone willing to pursue it with genuine passion, regardless of their circumstances or the prejudices of others. The young woman who had approached table 12 as an invisible service worker now stood revealed as someone whose understanding of French culture surpassed that of the French billionaire who had sought to humiliate her. Philippe's companions sat in mortified silence, finally understanding that their evening's entertainment had transformed into their host's complete intellectual destruction. The woman in pearls had stopped fidgeting entirely, her mouth slightly agape as she processed the reversal she had just witnessed. The businessmen appeared to be reconsidering every assumption they had made about merit and privilege, their comfortable worldview cracking under the weight of destiny's demonstration. They had come expecting to enjoy the casual cruelty of someone punching down at the less fortunate, only to discover they had front-row seats to the intellectual dismantling of someone who had confused accident of birth with earned achievement. "Extraordinary," Mrs. Patterson whispered, her voice carrying just enough to be heard throughout the dining room. "Absolutely extraordinary." The academic in her recognized that she had just witnessed one of those rare moments when theoretical knowledge transformed into practical wisdom, when years of study crystallized into perfect expression. Destiny had not merely recited facts or demonstrated memorization. She had revealed understanding so profound that it illuminated the difference between education and mere information. The young woman standing before them had achieved something that Philippe, despite all his advantages, had never managed. She had made French culture her own, through love rather than entitlement, through study rather than assumption, through passion rather than possession. The aftermath of Destiny's intellectual triumph unfolded with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche, gathering power and scope with each passing hour as the digital age transformed a single evening's confrontation into a global phenomenon. By the time Philippe Dubois had fled Le Jardin in humiliated silence, his face burning with the shame of public intellectual dismantling, 3 separate videos of the exchange were already uploading to various platforms. The young couple at Table 8 had captured the entire Verlaine recitation, while a business dinner at Table 3 had recorded Destiny's devastating philosophical exposition about money versus wisdom. Most significantly, Mrs. Patterson herself had discreetly filmed the climactic moments on her phone, her academic instincts recognizing that she was documenting something historically important. Within 6 hours, the combined footage would reach over 2 billion views, launching Destiny Brooks from invisible service worker to unlikely internet sensation. The first video to gain traction appeared with the caption, "American Waitress School's French Billionaire in his own language," accompanied by hashtags that would soon trend across multiple continents. The footage captured everything: Philippe's condescending dismissal, Destiny's perfect pronunciation, and most memorably, the moment when his arrogant confidence crumbled into stammering confusion. Viewers around the world found themselves captivated not just by the reversal of expectations, but by the grace and dignity with which Destiny had handled her tormentor. Comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences with prejudice and condescension, turning the video into a rallying cry for anyone who had ever been underestimated based on their appearance or circumstances. The hashtag "She Can Read the Menu" began appearing in dozens of languages as the story transcended cultural boundaries. Within 12 hours, major news outlets had picked up the story, with CNN, BBC, and France 24 all featuring segments about the Boston restaurant revelation. Morning show producers scrambled to book Destiny for interviews, while cultural commentators debated the broader implications of the viral moment. The French consul general in Boston released a statement praising Destiny's exemplary understanding of French literary tradition, while several universities reached out with speaking invitations. Academic journals requested articles about her approach to language learning, and publishing houses inquired about potential book deals. The transformation was surreal in its speed and scope. One evening, she had been cleaning office buildings after serving tables, and now she was fielding calls from literary agents and television producers who wanted to understand how someone in her circumstances had achieved such remarkable fluency. Philippe Dubois, meanwhile, watched his carefully constructed reputation crumble in real time as the internet's collective memory proved longer and less forgiving than he had anticipated. His wine importing business faced immediate backlash as French cultural organizations publicly distanced themselves from his behavior, with several chateaux terminating their exclusive distribution agreements within 48 hours. The Bordeaux Wine Council issued a terse statement emphasizing that authentic appreciation of French culture requires humility and respect, qualities that cannot be purchased regardless of one's financial resources. His social media accounts, once filled with admiring comments about his sophisticated lifestyle, became battlegrounds where critics dissected every previous post for evidence of cultural pretension and intellectual shallowness. The man who had built his identity on presumed superiority found himself becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of confusing privilege with wisdom. The viral phenomenon reached its peak when Destiny received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Marie-Claire Dubois, a prominent linguistics professor at the Sorbonne, who happened to share Philippe's surname, but no family connection. "Mademoiselle Brooks," the professor said in accented English, "I have watched your video perhaps 20 times now, and I must tell you that your pronunciation of Verlaine is superior to many of my French students. Would you be interested in participating in our summer symposium on Franco-American cultural exchange?" The invitation was followed by others from French cultural institutions around the world, each recognizing that Destiny represented something far more valuable than Philippe's shallow appropriation. She embodied the genuine love of learning that transcended national boundaries and economic circumstances. The response from Boston's French-American community was particularly moving, with dozens of people reaching out to share their own stories of cultural preservation and language learning. The Alliance Française of Boston invited Destiny to serve as an honorary ambassador, while local French restaurants began offering her meals in gratitude for what one owner called showing the world what real cultural appreciation looks like. When the irony was not lost on anyone that the very establishments Philippe had frequented for decades were now celebrating someone whose understanding of French culture far exceeded his own. Le Jardin itself became an unlikely pilgrimage site, with diners requesting Destiny's table, and Marcus, the manager, eventually having to implement a reservation system to manage the increased traffic. Perhaps most significantly, the story resonated with educators and students around the world who recognized Destiny's journey as validation of their own struggles and aspirations. Libraries reported increased interest in foreign language materials, while online language learning platforms saw unprecedented enrollment spikes. Destiny began receiving messages from people who had been inspired to pursue their own hidden intellectual passions, often accompanied by videos of them reciting poetry in languages they had taught themselves. A particularly touching submission came from a janitor in Detroit who had learned Mandarin Chinese by listening to podcasts during his overnight shifts, crediting Destiny's example with giving him the courage to finally apply for the translation position he had always dreamed of pursuing. The media attention, while overwhelming, provided Destiny with opportunities she had never dared to imagine. The French Cultural Center of Boston offered her a position as educational outreach coordinator, allowing her to leave both her restaurant and cleaning jobs for meaningful work that honored her linguistic abilities. Publishers competed to secure the rights to her story, with advance offers that would not only cover her mother's medical expenses, but provide financial security for the first time in her adult life. Television producers pitched documentary concepts, while streaming platforms expressed interest in dramatic adaptations of her journey from invisible service worker to celebrated intellectual. More importantly, the viral moment created a platform for Destiny to advocate for the values her grandmother had instilled in her. In her first formal interview with CNN, she spoke eloquently about the importance of accessible education and the dangers of judging people based on their circumstances rather than their capabilities. My grandmother fled France with nothing but her language and her love of learning, she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the audience. She taught me that knowledge belongs to anyone willing to pursue it with genuine passion. What happened at Le Jardin wasn't really about me or Monsieur Dubois. It was about the difference between education and entitlement, between wisdom and mere performance. The interview clip became its own viral sensation, shared by educators, immigrants, and working-class families who saw their own struggles reflected in Destiny's words. Universities began reaching out with scholarship offers, while the MacArthur Foundation added her name to their list of potential genius grant recipients. The French government extended an official invitation for her to visit as a cultural ambassador, with plans to document her journey back to the country her grandmother had been forced to flee decades earlier. The full circle symmetry was not lost on anyone. The granddaughter of a French refugee would return to France as an honored guest, her mastery of the language serving as a bridge between cultures rather than a weapon of division. As the weeks passed and the initial viral frenzy settled into sustained recognition, Destiny found herself processing the surreal transformation of her circumstances while remaining grounded in the values that had sustained her through years of struggle. The worn French dictionary that had once been her secret comfort now sat on her new desk at the French Cultural Center, its pages a testament to the power of persistent study and unwavering determination. She had proven that intellectual excellence could emerge from anywhere, that cultural appreciation transcended economic circumstances, and that sometimes the most profound wisdom came from the most unexpected sources. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Destiny Brooks sat beside her mother's hospital bed at Massachusetts General, watching Celeste's face light up with a vitality that chemotherapy had stolen, but recent good news had restored. The latest scans showed remarkable improvement, and for the first time in 2 years, the word remission had entered their vocabulary with genuine hope rather than desperate wishful thinking. Celeste's hand, no longer trembling from treatment side effects, held a leather-bound copy of Baudelaire's collected works, a gift from the French Cultural Center that had become her daily companion during recovery. "Read to me again, baby girl," she whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Read me the one Grand-Mère Amélie used to recite when she thought I was sleeping." Destiny opened the book to a page she knew by heart, her fingers tracing words that connected 3 generations of women who had found strength in the music of language. "Sois sage, ô ma douleur, et tiens-toi plus tranquille," she began, her voice carrying the same melodic cadence that had once filled their small apartment when Amélie would recite poetry while cooking dinner. "Tu réclamais le soir, il descend. Le voici." As she continued Baudelaire's meditation on pain and peace, Destiny could almost feel her grandmother's presence in the room, a spiritual bridge connecting past and present through the eternal power of words. Celeste closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to her daughter transform suffering into beauty with the same grace Amélie had displayed during her own struggles as a young refugee building a new life in America. The transformation in their circumstances still felt surreal sometimes, though Destiny had learned to accept the extraordinary turn her life had taken while remaining grounded in the values that had sustained her through years of hardship. The modest apartment they had struggled to maintain had been replaced by a comfortable home in Cambridge, close enough to the French Cultural Center for Destiny's work, but far enough from the media attention to provide sanctuary for her mother's recovery. The crushing medical bills that had once arrived with relentless regularity were now memories, replaced by the financial security that had come with book advances, speaking engagements, and her new position as the Cultural Center's Director of Community Outreach. More importantly, she had been able to hire a full-time caregiver for Celeste, allowing her mother to focus entirely on healing, rather than worrying about their survival. "Tell me about Grand-mère again," Celeste said softly, her eyes still closed, as she absorbed the peaceful atmosphere that poetry always created around them. "Tell me about the night she decided to teach you French." Destiny smiled, settling back in her chair as she prepared to share a story that had taken on new meaning since that evening at Le Jardin. It was a winter night when Destiny was 7 years old, struggling with homework while Celeste worked a double shift at the textile factory. Amélie had appeared at her bedside like a fairy godmother, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight as she announced that it was time for Destiny to learn the language of her ancestors. "But why, Grand-mère?" young Destiny had asked. "Because, ma chérie," Amélie had replied in her musical accent. "Language is the only inheritance that can never be stolen from you." The memory took on profound resonance as Destiny reflected on how prescient her grandmother's words had proven to be. Everything else, money, possessions, even health, could be lost or taken away. But the knowledge Amélie had planted in her young mind had grown into something that no amount of prejudice or circumstance could diminish. It had been her shield against Philippe's cruelty, her sword in defending her dignity, and ultimately her key to unlocking opportunities she had never dared to imagine. The worn French dictionary that had once been her secret companion now sat in a place of honor at the Cultural Center, displayed alongside a photo of Amélie from 1943, when she had first arrived in Boston, carrying nothing but courage and an unshakable belief in the power of education. The work at the French Cultural Center had become more than a job. It was a calling that allowed Destiny to honor her grandmother's legacy, while creating opportunities for others to discover their own hidden potential. She had developed programs that brought French language and culture to underserved communities, working with libraries, community centers, and schools to ensure that economic circumstances would never be a barrier to cultural education. The scholarship fund she had established in Amélie's name already supported 15 students from working-class families, each pursuing their own linguistic dreams with the same determination that had carried Destiny through years of late-night study sessions. Watching these students discover their own voices in foreign languages reminded her daily of why Amélie's gift had been so precious and why it needed to be shared as widely as possible. The personal transformation had been equally profound, though perhaps more subtle, than the external changes that had captured public attention. Destiny had learned to navigate the world of academic conferences and cultural events with the same grace she had once brought to serving tables. But now she moved through these spaces as an equal rather than an invisible presence. She spoke at universities about the importance of accessible education, consulted with libraries about expanding their foreign language collections, and served on panels discussing the intersection of class, culture, and intellectual achievement. The young woman who had once cleaned offices in the pre-dawn hours now found herself dining with ambassadors and professors, her voice valued not because of her circumstances, but because of her insights. The most unexpected development had been the letter that arrived 3 weeks ago, written in careful English on expensive letterhead bearing Philippe Dubois's name. The man who had fled Le Jardin in humiliated silence had spent months processing his own transformation, watching his former life crumble while slowly coming to understand the profound differences between entitlement and earned respect. His letter was remarkable for its complete absence of excuses or justifications, instead offering a simple but sincere apology for behavior he now recognized as inexcusable. More significantly, he had requested a meeting to discuss how he might contribute meaningfully to the scholarship fund, acknowledging that financial support was the least he could do to make amends for his actions. Destiny had spent considerable time deciding how to respond to Philippe's overture, ultimately concluding that forgiveness was not about absolving him of responsibility, but about freeing herself from the burden of carrying anger. The man who had attempted to humiliate her had inadvertently become the catalyst for her liberation, and she recognized that his public downfall had been punishment enough for his arrogance. When they finally met at a quiet cafe near Harvard Square, Philippe appeared genuinely transformed. His former swagger replaced by humility, his condescension replaced by curiosity about her work, and genuine interest in supporting educational initiatives that could prevent others from developing the blind spots that had led to his own spectacular failure. Their conversation lasted 3 hours and culminated in Philippe's commitment to become the scholarship fund's largest donor, providing enough support to expand the program from 15 students to 50 within the next year. More importantly, he had requested that his contribution remain anonymous, recognizing that any public association with his name might overshadow the program's mission. His transformation seemed complete when he asked Destiny to recommend French language resources for his own study, admitting that his viral humiliation had forced him to confront how little he actually understood about the culture he had claimed to represent. The irony was not lost on either of them, that the woman he had dismissed as ignorant would now become his teacher. As evening fell and visiting hours drew to a close, Destiny helped her mother settle back into bed, both women filled with the peace that came from witnessing healing in all its forms. Celeste's physical recovery was progressing beautifully, while Destiny's emotional and professional growth continued to exceed even her most ambitious dreams. Tomorrow would bring new students to the cultural center, new opportunities to share Amélie's legacy, and new chances to prove that wisdom could emerge from any circumstances when nurtured with patience and love. The journey from invisible service worker to celebrated educator had been unexpected and sometimes overwhelming, but it had ultimately fulfilled the promise Amélie had made so many years ago that knowledge, once gained, could never be taken away. 1 year after the evening that transformed her from invisible service worker to celebrated educator, Destiny Brooks stood at the podium of the newly opened Amélie Brooks Institute for Language Excellence, looking out at an audience that would have seemed impossible to imagine just 12 months earlier. The gleaming conference hall buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages as diplomats, educators, community leaders, and scholarship recipients gathered to celebrate the official launch of what had become Boston's premier multicultural learning center. French Consul General Marie-Pierre Laurent sat in the front row alongside Harvard's president, while Mrs. Eleanor Patterson beamed with pride from her seat near the stage. Most remarkably, 50 students from working-class backgrounds occupied places of honor, each representing the living embodiment of Amélie's belief that language could serve as a bridge to opportunity regardless of one's circumstances. The institute itself was a testament to how far Destiny had traveled from those desperate nights of cleaning offices after serving tables, though she had never forgotten the struggles that had shaped her journey. Built in a renovated historic building in Cambridge, the facility featured state-of-the-art language labs, a library stocked with materials in 30 languages, and community spaces designed to welcome learners from every background imaginable. The main conference room bore a simple plaque: "Language is the only inheritance that can never be stolen from you. Amélie Brooks, 1943. Below it hung the original French dictionary that had sustained Destiny through years of secret study, now preserved under glass as inspiration for future generations of unlikely scholars who might discover their own hidden potential within these walls. Mesdames et messieurs, distinguished guests, and most importantly, fellow learners," Destiny began, her voice carrying the confidence that had been forged in the crucible of public humiliation and emerged as unshakable self-assurance. "We gather today not simply to open a building, but to celebrate a principle that my grandmother carried with her when she fled France in 1943 that knowledge belongs to anyone willing to pursue it, with genuine passion and dedication. The audience fell silent as she spoke, captivated by the same eloquence that had first stunned Philippe Dubois and subsequently inspired millions around the world. Her transformation from service worker to cultural ambassador was complete, yet she remained grounded in the values that had sustained her through years of invisibility and struggle. The speech that followed wove together themes of heritage and hope, connecting her grandmother's refugee experience to the contemporary struggles of students who faced barriers based on economics, race, or circumstance rather than ability or dedication. She spoke movingly about the night Amélie had first taught her French words, drawing parallels to the countless moments when knowledge was passed from one generation to the next, despite seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Language is not simply communication, she explained, her words carrying the weight of lived experience. It is identity, distance, and ultimately liberation. When we learn a new language, we don't just acquire vocabulary. We gain access to different ways of seeing the world, thinking about problems, and imagining solutions that might never have occurred to us within the limitations of a single linguistic framework. As she spoke, Destiny's eyes found familiar faces throughout the audience, each representing a different chapter in her remarkable journey. Marcus, the former restaurant manager from Le Jardin, had become an unexpected ally, using his connections in Boston's hospitality industry to create internship opportunities for institute students. Dr. Marie-Claire Dubois from the Sorbonne participated via video link, announcing the establishment of a student exchange program that would allow institute scholars to study in France while French students experienced American urban culture. Most surprisingly, Philippe Dubois himself sat in the back row, his presence a powerful symbol of redemption and the possibility of genuine transformation, even for those who had once embodied the worst aspects of privilege and prejudice. The climax of her speech came when Destiny addressed the question that had launched her into public consciousness, though now she spoke with the authority of someone who had proven herself beyond any doubt. "A year ago, someone suggested that I couldn't even read a menu," she said, her voice carrying just enough humor to acknowledge the absurdity while honoring the pain the moment had caused. Today, I want to say with absolute certainty, yes, I can read the menu and so much more. But more importantly, every student in this room can read the menu, can master languages that connect them to cultures around the world, and can use that knowledge to build bridges rather than walls between communities. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Destiny raised her hand for silence as she prepared to deliver her most important message. "The real question was never whether I could read a French menu," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The real question was whether our society would recognize intellectual excellence wherever it chooses to appear, regardless of the circumstances that surround it. The real question was whether we would choose to see potential rather than limitations, possibility rather than prejudice, bridges rather than barriers." She paused, allowing her words to resonate throughout the hall. "This institute exists because my grandmother taught me that language is power, but also because Miss Patterson recognized that power when others chose to ignore it, and because Philippe Dubois ultimately chose growth over ego when confronted with his own limitations." The ceremony concluded with the presentation of the first annual Amélie Brooks Awards, recognizing individuals who had overcome significant obstacles to achieve linguistic excellence. The recipients included a former janitor who had learned Mandarin through online courses, a single mother who had mastered Arabic while working multiple jobs, and a refugee teenager whose English poetry had been published in literary magazines despite arriving in America with no formal education. Each story echoed themes from Destiny's own journey, while proving that her experience was not unique, but rather representative of countless individuals whose potential had been overlooked or dismissed by those who confused circumstance with capability. As the formal program ended and guests moved to the reception, Destiny found herself surrounded by the scholarship recipients who had become the heart and soul of the institute. These students, ranging in age from teenagers to retirees, represented every conceivable background and life situation, united only by their shared commitment to learning and their determination to overcome whatever obstacles stood between them and their linguistic goals. Watching them interact with diplomats and professors as equals, their confidence growing with each conversation, reminded Destiny of why Amélie's legacy had been worth preserving and expanding. The invisible had become visible, the dismissed had become celebrated, and the underestimated had become unstoppable. The evening's final surprise came when Philippe approached her during the reception, his transformation from arrogant billionaire to humble supporter now complete after months of genuine effort to understand both French culture and his own limitations. "Mademoiselle Brooks," he said quietly, his accent still present, but no longer wielded as a weapon of superiority. "I wanted to thank you for allowing me to be part of this evening. My contribution to the Institute is the very least I could do to make amends for my behavior. But watching these students tonight has taught me something far more valuable than money could ever provide." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You have shown me the difference between possessing culture and truly understanding it, between speaking a language and living its values." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Celeste Brooks, who had insisted on attending despite her ongoing recovery, her face radiant with pride as she watched her daughter accept congratulations from admirers who recognized her not for her circumstances, but for her achievements. The 3 generations of Brooks women, Amélie's spirit, Celeste's strength, and Destiny's triumph, seemed to converge in that moment, creating a perfect circle of inheritance that had begun with a young refugee's determination to preserve her language and culminated in an institute that would serve thousands of students for generations to come. The journey from "she can't even read the menu" to "yes, she can read the menu and so much more" was complete, but the story of what could be accomplished when potential met opportunity had only just begun.